And that's why we have librarians, that's why we have teachers, that's why we have parents, that's why we have booksellers to help us find those books. This I always show to kids too. It's my official author photo, and all that white crumpled stuff, it's paper. And it's to remind you when you are working on your own stories, you're going to make tons of mistakes. That is part of the writing process. We call it rewriting. And rewriting is actually my very favorite part of the whole process. I get ideas from all kinds of things, but especially things that make me mad or passionate. So if you're having a hard time thinking about what to write about, I wrote Ivan because I was thinking a lot about this poor guy stuck in this cage and I was mad. I wrote a book called Home of the Brave because I was absolutely amazed at the resilience of these refugees who were coming into the place I was living called Minneapolis and starting their lives over again. I wrote Crenshaw because I was thinking a lot about childhood hunger and it made me mad and I wanted to write about it. Wish Tree was actually based on a story that made me very mad. Somebody had gone to a house where some people had just moved in and put a big note on their door that said, "Go away." And I was so mad that I wrote an entire book based on that one incident. And with Willowdene, I was thinking a lot about climate change, which of course right now in California is just a huge, overwhelming, tragic problem. So there are people fighting these good fights when things like this happen. And in the case of otters, Monterey Bay Aquarium has these amazing scientists who have taken this tiny population of otters. They were down to like 50, and it has exploded because they have focused one by one on otter after otter. And the net result is that the entire ecosystem has changed for the better. So there always is hope, and I need you guys to remember that. Now let's do some questions, maybe even some answers.
Perfect. So we're going to go across in the order the classes are on my screen because that makes it easy for me. So we will start with a question from Miss Pinkapank's class. Please let me know if I'm saying your last names wrong, by the way. I'm doing my best. And then it will go Bishkov, Moore, Rasner. I'm like looking at like email headers. And then
Pick off.
McLaren.
Thank you.
Perfect. So we will start with Pink. Oop, there we go.
Here we go.
How did you get the idea to write the book Otter?
I so love that question because you know what? It actually started with just looking at a picture. I happened to see a photo of an otter close up. It was like the one I showed you with the baby. And I thought, wouldn't it be fun to write about being in the head of an entirely different animal? I love writing about other things. Like I wrote about being a tree, believe it or not, in Wish Tree. And when I wrote the one and only Ivan, I became a gorilla for a while. And when I wrote the one and only Bob, I was a dog. And I love doing that because I'm fascinated by other creatures and I get to kind of imagine what it's like to be something that comfortable in the water. If you ever watch an otter swim, you have never seen anybody have as much fun. Trust me.
Perfect. And then we'll go on to our next class. Bishkov. You told me how to say it and then I didn't hear it.
Hi, pick off.
Bishkov. Perfect.
Come on up closer so she can see your face.
Where do you get the inspiration to know how the animals are feeling inside?
Oh, it's such a good question. And you know what's really funny? You don't exactly know what they're feeling, do you? It's always a leap. We're always guessing. I mean, when you go home and you look at your cat or your dog, or sometimes even your little brother, you don't always know what they're thinking or feeling. I mean, you can guess. You can tell if their tail's wagging. You can see if the cat is yowling for more food, as my cat does about every hour and a half. But you don't know. And the thing about writing about animals is it's always a leap. It's called, there's a fancy word for it. We call it anthropomorphism, and it means taking, your human characteristics and imposing them on an animal. I tried really hard to be as much of an otter as I could. And the only way to do that is with research. So you watch videos and you talk to scientists and you read books and you try to imagine what it's like to be that creature. But it's always an experiment. It's always a leap. So I love that you asked that.
Okay, and then we'll go to Mrs. Moore's class.
What was your inspiration for your books?
It's funny, it depends. I became a writer, to tell you the truth. I became a writer because I was not very good at anything else. I got a degree in English, and then I became the world's worst waitress. I once spilled 4 strawberry milkshakes on a man in a totally white suit. And I became a bad plant waterer and a bad toilet cleaner and a bad this and a bad that. And I was avoiding being a writer because I was afraid to fail. And it seemed like such a public way to fail. Well, don't follow that career path because of course you're going to fail. When you try anything new, whether it's, joining the soccer team or learning to play piano or learning a new language, of course you're going to fail. And I was so worried about failing that I didn't have the bravery to step out and become a writer. And it took me a long time. But I think my inspiration came from the moments when I worked on a story and I realized I'm really having fun. This feels like what I should be doing. And you have to find that for every one of you. It's going to be different. But the most important thing to remember is, of course, you're going to fail. That's how we learn.
Okay, Miss Drasner's class.
How much time does it take to write a book?
Oh, that's a really good question too. But it's so funny because it's so different for everybody. I know people who've been working on books for 20 years, the same book. And most of my writing friends and I find it takes about a year to 2 years. But that sometimes we're working on other things, and sometimes there are other parts of writing, like answering fan mail or doing something like this. There are lots of parts of being a writer that aren't just, putting words on paper. But I wrote this series called Animorphs. If you go to the library, you'll probably see, you might have some graphic versions of that. And I wrote it a long time ago with my husband, and those books came out every single month. So we wrote a book every single month, and we had a new baby. So we drank a lot of coffee. So it is possible to write really fast. If you like writing, try writing with a friend because sometimes that makes the process faster and easier.
Okay, and then Miss McCraren's class.
Hi.
What do you find
Wait.
what do you find interesting about otters?
Oh, I love that question. Just about everything. Their most amazing thing to me is how they live. See, then we're talking about a particular kind of otter called a southern sea otter. They spend almost all their time in the water. They hardly ever come out, and the water is cold. So I think one of the most interesting things about them is they have the densest fur on the planet. It is so incredibly thick. And a lot of mammals that are adapted to being in the ocean have blubber, a lot of fat, to keep them warm. That's not the case with otters. And it's one of the reasons that they almost disappeared. Their fur is so dense that people wanted to make coats out of it. And there was this period, especially around Monterey Bay, like I said, they were down to about 50 otters at the turn of the century. And it was only because people said, wait a minute, stop, we have to change the way we're behaving, that they were able to repopulate. And otters are very, very, very important to the ecosystem there. It's called a kelp forest, and it looks a little like a forest, only it's underwater. And without otters there to eat the right foods, things get out of whack. And the entire kelp forest suffers, which means all these other fish and mammals suffer. So they are what's considered sort of a foundational species. They're really, really important, in addition to being incredibly cute.
Awesome. So now we will go back to the beginning and do another round of questions. So we'll start with Miss Pink Banks again.
All right, Damien, go ahead.
Why do you think that the animals like to be in the zoo?
Oh, I am so glad you asked that. Animals in the zoo is a really complicated question. And I mean, in a perfect world, we wouldn't have animals in zoos, would we? They'd be living their lives in the wild, but we don't live, sadly, in a perfect world. And as humans have encroached and taken up all the land and made it harder and harder for animals to survive, zoos have evolved. And there used to be there still are really bad zoos that mistreat their animals, that don't have the money to take care of them. Then there are other zoos, and these are called AZA accredited zoos. And these are zoos that meet standards, and they do their very best to take care of their animals. And they work on species preservation and education. And I have become sort of a reluctant advocate for zoos because I've realized how important they are to maintaining species. So if you ever go by, like, one of those little tacky roadside zoos where they have I don't know, a tiger in a tiny cage or something, do not give them your money. Do not visit places like that. Go to zoos where they really, really take care of their animals. But the funny thing about animals in zoos, I'm sure always they would rather be in the wild, but they often live much, much longer in zoos because they have veterinary care and the best food. And very often they are given all kinds of treats and fun things to do to keep them mentally engaged. Elephants are a really good example of a complicated zoo animal because they need to move. They travel huge distances. And zoos are starting to realize that they have to give these animals more room. So it's not perfect. And I wish it were, but one way you can help is by learning about animals and going to zoos that really take care of them.
Okay, great. Ms. Bikowskas.
If you get frustrated, how do you get the inspiration to keep going?
Oh, I wish, I have been doing this for decades and I still get frustrated. Probably shouldn't tell you that. I probably should say, I don't ever get frustrated, but of course you do. Every time I go to write a new book, I think, I have no idea how to do this. What am I thinking? I don't know how to be a writer. I don't know how to tell a story. So that part of your brain, you have to tell, hey, quiet down, go be in timeout for a while, because that self-doubt gets in the way of telling good stories or doing anything, as we were talking about before. And I call that voice my inner editor. And your inner editor goes, you know what, you are really not very good at this. Your little sister writes better stories. And when my inner editor acts up, I tell her to be quiet and I push on ahead. Sometimes if I'm really frustrated, I use something called the Pomodoro method. I bet some of you have used this. It's really good if you have ADHD or if you're getting frustrated with a project. You divide it into teeny tiny itsy bitsy bits. Like maybe I'm working on this book and I'm thinking, oh, I don't know how to start. And I'm so overwhelmed, I don't do anything. So I set a timer, and maybe it'll just be for 2 minutes. And I tell myself, just for 2 minutes, type anything you can. And it doesn't have to be good and it doesn't have to make sense. You can just type, I don't know what to write. I don't know what to write. But it's getting your brain working. And then I reset the timer and I do it again and I do it again. And it helps me get through those rough periods. But it's a really good question because when you're working on your own stories, of course, you're going to feel that way sometimes. So just know it's part of the process.
Awesome. Okay, Mrs. Moore's class.
Have you ever thought of writing a book about yourself?
Oh, I'm sorry, the audio cut out for a little bit. Could you repeat that?
Have you ever thought of writing a book about yourself?
About myself? Oh, I don't know. I was thinking, would that be a boring book or a really interesting book or a little bit of both? I feel like when you write your stories, you always bring yourself into it. There's a little bit of me in every character. And I think you'll find when you're writing your stories, you're going to do that too. It's sort of like a recipe, and you take maybe a bit of your best friend and a bit of your favorite teacher and a bit of your own, inner fears, and you mix it all together, and suddenly you have this character. So I think even when I'm writing about animals, I'm very much bringing my own sensibilities into it, even when I try to be as close to how they might be viewing the world. But that's a really good question. I haven't, and maybe someday. I know some people. I'm sort of one of those people who doesn't really like to talk about herself, so I guess I'd have to get over that first.
Okay, and then Miss Drasner's class.
We are reading Wish Tree, so we actually have a wish tree question for you right now.
Oh,
How did you come up with the characters in Wish Tree?
oh, I'm so glad you asked that because it's funny. I did this with Ivan too. I got about a third of the way through writing Wish Tree, and I looked at the book and I said, oh, I have really blown it. This is never going to work. And now with Ivan, I actually threw the book away in the trash. And then I pulled it out after a few hours and said, you know what? Even if it's not working, I'm interested in this story, even if I think nobody else will ever read it. With Wish Tree, my problem was I had this great idea. I'm going to tell an entire story from the point of view of a tree. And the tree's going to know all about this community and have been around for, 200 years. And then I thought, wait a minute, trees don't move. I mean, they wave back and forth a little, but you have to have characters who can do things in your story. That's when I came up with all the animals. And that's why Bongo was so important. And that's why the raccoons and the owls and the skunks and possums, that's why everybody came to be, because I needed animals to do some of the work of the story. When you're working on your own stories, you're going to find that happens. You might you get to a point, maybe you hit a wall and you think, how am I ever going to fix this? Well, take a deep breath, because there's always a way to fix a story. It just, sometimes it takes a while. So that's how I ended up with all those many characters. Are you guys going to make a wish tree? Are you going to make some wishes?
We hope so. It's our whole school read aloud. So everyone at our school is reading Wish Tree together right now.
Oh, that's so
And-
lovely.
I don't know if you can see, but one of the students in here drew the wish tree, and these are our questions for you.
Oh, that's so lovely. It's beautiful. It's so much fun if you get the chance to do wishes. When I do school talks, I tell kids to make a totally selfish wish, a wish for yourself, and then a wish for somebody or something else, like maybe, your grandma, and then a wish for the entire world. And it's so fun to see what people come up with.
We
Mhm.
love that. Thank you.
Okay, friends, we will do our last question from Mrs. McCraren's class. And then because it is 11:30, we gotta wrap this up.
What book are you writing next?
Oh, good question. Well, I just finished one, and it is so interesting because it is called Pocket Bear. You can hear my dog barking in the background. And Pocket Bear is about a teeny tiny stuffed animal. Boss, come here, baby. Come here. Good watchdog. And she'll join us for the last question. And so I am writing from the point of view of stuffed animals, which I have never done before. And it was really fascinating. There were during wars, a lot of times soldiers would be given teeny tiny little bears and their eyes sort of looked up. And they would put them in their pockets. And when they looked down, they would see this little bear looking up at them and think about their loved ones back home. And that's where I got the idea. So that is coming out next fall.
Perfect. Thank you guys so much for joining us today and for your excellent questions.
These were amazing questions. I love talking to you all. You're just the best.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
Bye, guys. Say bye.